Greetings, good evening. First, I'm going to do a spot check. I'm going to do a reading. I'm going to see where it tears, just to see. I'm going to do three very quickly. Page 109. In Stower's courtroom that day, the Chilton family lawyers argued that Morrissey was simply out to punish the newspaper because it exposed his nefarious dealings. It would cost the Gazette-Mail thousands of dollars to compile the documents that Morrissey subpoenaed. He alleged that there was a conspiracy to shutter the Daily Mail. But the Chilton family owned both newspapers, and you can't conspire with yourself. Just because someone was in prison once doesn't mean they will automatically break the law again, Stowers interjected. Book number 2. Page 377. On February 4th, 2018, which by the way is 10 days before February 14th, 2018, Priebus appeared on Meet the Press and said he had not heard the president say that he wanted the special counsel fired. After Priebus's appearance, the president called Priebus and said he did a great job on Meet the Press. The president also told Priebus that the president had never said any of those things about the special counsel. And from the third book, page 87. For that matter, there is most curious irony among the intellectual poor. They come to the slums of the other America, to the physical life of impoverishment, because they are fleeing a spiritual poverty in the affluent society. Allen Ginsberg wrote of the beats in Howl and other poems. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. His claim is exaggerated, yet it contains a certain truth. Though many of these people have the talent and the education to win commercial success in the great society, they choose to live in the slums because they have found simple material well-being hollow. I was not apprised at the time of the response that First Lady Melania Trump made after the events on Capitol Hill on January 6th of 2021. I was apprised of other events involving the First Lady throughout the last 4 years during the term of the President, First Lady, Donald and Melania Trump. Specifically, the travels that the First Lady made to centers throughout Texas and elsewhere in the United States where children who had come to this country were being housed, including the manners in which she made her own public decisions and comments on her understanding of what was going on and what was appropriate, even if it was in contestation with the predominant sentiment that was being promoted by the President of the United States. Apparently, during that time frame on January 6th, she remarked on and stated and acknowledged the deaths of the people that were involved. And then there is an acknowledgement that she referenced herself about casting aspersions on herself as part of what was ongoing. One of the things that I had noticed in 2019 through 20 was a series of events in the late summer, early autumn of 2019. This was a very, very contentious time. There is going to be a lot of discussion coming up very shortly about the events that happened at the highest levels in the United States. Not what was reported on in the media, not what was allowed to be a part of the predominant talking points that were circulated as part of the subterfuge and replacement for actual political discourse in this country. But what was actually going on at Congress, what was actually going on at White House, and what was actually going on in a manner that sabotaged effective policy within the United States and the actions that certain people took, including the First Lady and the Second Lady. I have up here right now these items from congress.gov. First, H.R. 2232, New Pathways Act, sponsor Representative Elijah Cummings. Latest action, May 15th, 2019, referred to the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security. What is the New Pathways Act? According to this site, the New Pathways Act is a bill regarding the status of people who are attempting to re-enter the country, who are citizens, in order to require them to have identification. It is an amendment to a pre-existing bill regarding people who are citizens but were not born in the United States, re-entering the country and having to provide a form of identity verification. It was first proposed in April 10th of 2019. After that, there was HR 448, Medicare Drug Price Negotiation Act. Sponsor, Representative Elijah Cummings. Latest action, September 25th, 2019. Subcommittee hearings held. Next, Affordable and Safe Prescription Drug Importation Act. Sponsor, Representative Elijah Cummings. Latest action, January 25th, 2019, referred to the Subcommittee on Health. And then, finally, HR 3, Elijah E. Cummings Lower Drug Costs Now Act. Sponsor, Representative Frank Pallone Jr. Passed in the House after the death of Representative Elijah Cummings. Now, according to the article that is online right now, First Lady Melania Trump went to Capitol Hill for a forum on opiates. It included participants from the Senate and discussed matters related to the opiate epidemic and how it correlated with, at that time, the 1-year anniversary of the Support for Patients and Communities Act. But there was another act that had gone through Congress that referenced support, specifically support for families of active duty military when it came to access to child care. This is very important. This is very important, especially in consideration of things that happened at the beginning of 2020. It correlated with actions that were compounded by the time the events on January 6th of 2021 occurred. I'm going to say blatantly, as somebody that actually has family, has kin, that I understand are still living in parts of Appalachia, and that have throughout my life known people that do not fit a particular stereotype of what is identified as Appalachian, that I find matters related to the opiate epidemic to be incredibly disturbing. And it is also incredibly disturbing to think about what the implications are of understanding that Representative Elijah Cummings, who at the time had a very significant leadership and seniority role in the House of Representatives, had 2 pending acts around the time of his death concerning access to prescription medications, one of which discusses negotiations, and another of which talks about affordable and safe, to have him and his life memorialized after his death with lower drug cost. This is very important. And it's also very important that there are, I believe, incredibly significant racialized and anti-immigrant sentiments behind these events. Now, I understand, and it would be ridiculous for us to not acknowledge that part of the role of a First Lady is to support the president in all manners, including manners that may have to deal with unconventional efforts. And that support does not necessarily mean to give public validation to all of his actions. First Lady is also representative of the people of the United States. And so to provide a counter position to what the president does, including publicly in ways that may seem to be challenging him, is actually, I think, a healthy reflection of the country when that occurs. But the implications of this and the implications of how they attempted to characterize the Capitol riot as being about a group of white supremacists that are promoting a race based agenda without a more comprehensive context is incredibly disingenuous and is actually very dangerous at this point in time. It is very concerning to me that there was an act that, by the way, last action was seen on what happened to be my birthday, right? But also happened to be the anniversary of a Water Appropriations Act. And the understanding of the Pathways Act, or an understanding of identifying pathways in connection with entry into the United States by people that are not born citizens of the United States in the context of dating and the other associations with the other things that were going on concurrently during that time frame is very disturbing. See, my understanding is that what was going on was a specific kind of outlay process connected to another level of telemedication. And that one of the things that has happened is that the opiate epidemic was actually used in process of human test subject experimentation connected to the development and implementation of various telemedication regimes. And that this is actually part of a conspiracy involving abuse of and by the pharmaceutical industry going back over 15 years. That there have been 3 successive waves where allegedly there was some kind of civil action that has attempted to address the opiate epidemic, but it ends up involving settlements for monetary damages that also have non-disclosed agreements or waivers of future liability associated with them. And I contend that they're really part of a very comprehensive high-level kickback scheme, insofar as those fees and penalties actually provide a means by which to temporarily recharacterize business operating costs in order to prepare for contracts further down the line on new product lines. And in this case, these events correlate with the time frame we now know was the time frame during which COVID-19 was being operationalized and was being put into a context wherein it was allowed to proliferate abroad before it ended up impacting people within the United States of America. I'm acknowledging this right now because I understand that there is a very significant and high level of matters related to these factors, and that it's absolutely essential to address it in those specific contexts. We've had several successive cycles of attempting to misrepresent what is going on in connection with alleged healthcare policy, and that we are in a situation now where we have a completely unconscionable relationship with the importation of actual people from other countries to be used as human test subjects in experimentation with both medical testing that is going on, including in connection with COVID-19, but not exclusively with COVID-19, as well as financial paradigms that are being set up and engineered while we are being presented with a false paradigm around what this pandemic response actually is. These events are very key. And I contend that these events were actually very, very significant in what provided a impetus for the kind of consistent and persistent organizing activity that was happening in Washington, D.C. and outside of the Capitol building prior to the events of January 6th, which, by the way, involved the President of the Senate acquiescing in his role as being the one with the authority to determine whether or not the votes and the situation with the Electoral College was constitutionally sound. When he did not fulfill the specific role he had in making the determination and said he was not the one who had authority, I contend authority was asserted. And that's what is still going on at this point in time. That in a variety and context of very significant breaches of constitutional process that have been going on for a very significant amount of time, that there has been a refusal of or sabotage in the ability of the representatives of the people to be able to assert what would be the appropriate authority under the context. And when that is acknowledged, it allows for the appropriate authority to emerge. And this is what I understand happened then, and this is what I understand is still trying to be meted out at this period of time. But it's very important to acknowledge this today because I'm not an immigrant. I was born in the United States of America, but I'm not from Texas. And yet, I had to come to Texas, and when I came to Texas and tried to go through the legal process in Texas to seek redress for things that had happened prior to me coming to Texas, I have now spent 3 years directly here in Dallas with not one person to talk to me about serious crimes I have been witness to and I've been attempted for extortion into cooperation with. And my choice was to attempt to pursue due process, representing myself, but also understanding that by representing myself, that I'm also a part of a constitutional system that has refused to provide me with representation. I deserve representation. The people that I'm connected to deserve representation. And if the people masquerading that they're in government or that they are in public office are not going to provide it, we have a right to provide it for ourselves. And so this is what I understand as part of the context here. It is exactly one day after the 3-year anniversary from when I was trafficked to Dallas, Texas, as part of a municipal bond that was a pairing of two cities that were supposed to be on the same bond with each other. It's absolutely connected to what is going on with COVID-19. It's absolutely connected to the co-location of services for telemedication that has been part of the experimental paradigm related specifically to the Texas marketplace under the Affordable Care Act, as well as other things that were precursors of that. And at this point in time, the refusal to actually acknowledge what happened to me specifically in whatever context I was in, with whatever level of risk I had been associated with or assumed, has not yet seen fit to actually expose the full implications of these matters. And unfortunately, because of that, we are in a deficiency that needs to be accounted for and it needs to be addressed. So I had once before put out a personal request that First Lady Melania Trump speak up specifically about particular matters related to what I understood her other initiative as First Lady was. And I received a response without a direct response. But at this period in time, I think it's important to acknowledge that this has been my understanding of what has been going on, and that I believe that the leadership that she showed that was allowed to be reflected in the public actually provided us with something that is very important for us to consider now, especially when we consider the fact, as I do, that right now in downtown Dallas, there are alleged to be buses with teenagers sitting on them, sometimes for more than a day, while other teenagers are inside a facility that is alleged to be a shelter, but is not. And these are the kind of things that the First Lady actually spoke about when she was on site in 2018 in Texas, when they were putting children and young people in tents after they had come into the country. We didn't remember that, or we did not acknowledge how important it was that she was on site and that she was attending to that. That was the kind of leadership we needed, and it's not what was acknowledged at the time. That's the kind of leadership we need from a First Lady right now. And we don't have that. And that's something that is on us to deal with. And I think it needs to be put on the record tonight.